The Jacksonville Jaguars are targeting three people at number 24. I'm going to tell you today who I believe target number one is, and we'll do it right here on Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Thank you for joining me, Tony Wiggins, on the Locked On Jaguars podcast, your daily podcast where it's your team every day, and we thank you for making us your first listen. Also, like to remind you that you can subscribe for free on our YouTube page, Locked On Jaguars, and make sure you check wherever you get your podcast every single day, audio-wise. Check in because we will be there to make sure you don't miss an episode. That's right, man. You can't be missing episodes of the Locked On Jaguars podcast because it's your team every single day. Today's sponsor, this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who can take you on that journey of self-discovery from wherever you are. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month. All right, I want to welcome any new listeners. I just called you, Luke. First of all, I just started out by calling you a new listener. But no, I want to thank all of the new listeners today. It is draft week. Good time to pick up new fans, and we'll welcome you in. And when I say we, I mean me and my everydayers here on Locked On Jaguars because, man, we couldn't do it without you. We are very grateful that you joined us. We're going to talk about the draft and obviously go back over some points that were made by Jags GM Trent Baalke when he met with the media last week. I had already had some shows planned out, so I really didn't discuss exactly what he said, but it's topic worthy today, and I think it's perfect timing because we want to do this during draft week as we lead up to Thursday when that pick is made and then have the crescendo of all of those things. Immediately after that pick, I'm doing a postcast. I decided to not be selfish and go to the draft party at the stadium that I'm invited to because the Jaguars are picking so late. I wanted to make sure I got the post draft reaction and the pick reaction. Get that into you as soon as possible. So I'll be watching that from the confines of my desk here at home, so I can make sure that I get that content out to you as soon as possible. I'm actually right across the river from the stadium, but braving that traffic and walking to my parking spot, it'd take me all day, especially that late at night. So we're going to do that. So that's just a quick look ahead. But today we're going to start reviewing some things based on what Trent Baalke said, in which I'll paraphrase. I won't read verbatim what the statement was, but basically he said they've trimmed their board down to 137 people. Okay. Out of all of the draft eligible players, I'm just thinking how many people are draft eligible or that we really realistically, they're going to be a couple of hundred draft picks, maybe like 220, 230 or something like that once all the compensatory picks are in. So of the draft eligible guys that we conceivably could believe could be drafted, anything after like 230 or whatever, once Mr. Irrelevant is chosen, I think it's 233. Once Mr. Irrelevant is chosen, then there'll probably be 200 or 300 other guys that are available. So to say that they're focused on 137 out of 237, so 137 sounds like a low number to be focused on until you realize that pick 137 is like in the 5th round or something like that. So that's a whole lot of players that they're focused on in terms of the draft. It sounds like a small number when you think only 137 people, so that you're eliminating everybody else. Well, when you think about need and you think about quarterback, that eliminates 15, 20 people right there, right? I don't think they're in the need in the market for a wide receiver. However, there are people that believe if certain body types are available, that they're going to go in that direction. If it's too good to pass up or too good to be true, I don't think they're going to pick a center, especially if that player doesn't project the versatility to play guard. I don't think they're going to go for a weak side linebacker type. So when you think about, I don't think they're going to go get a free safety, a guy that doesn't have any versatility. So when you look at it like that and start saying, okay, those are just positions. Now, what about character, people? What about the character, right? The character, those guys, you start eliminating those guys, whatever that number is. And then guys that they just don't think are good enough or just don't fit the culture. And that doesn't mean that they have bad character, it just means that they're not a good fit here. Once you do that, you've eliminated 90 people. So 90 plus 137 is 227. That's like everybody that's going to be drafted in rounds 1 through 7 numerically. And I know some of those people will be different, but it's not that much of a difference. You might have, if you look at everybody's top 232 just based on pure talent, what are you going to have? Like maybe a range of 50 or 60 guys here or there that aren't on that list. So basically the Jaguars, they're looking at everybody except a few positions and those few players that don't pick. They said that they've trimmed it down. They know they're targeting 3 people. This bothers me a little bit, and I'm gonna get into it here in this first segment before we start talking about who I believe in the second segment, who I think they're going to take, and then in the third segment, I'm gonna give you a comp, and I'm gonna tell you who I think that player is like and what he adds to the team. But before we get to that, there's this thing I gotta tell you, it bothers me a little bit, but it kind of doesn't. And it kind of does if you've heard this podcast before. Any of my everydayers understand that I think this way. I hate putting yourself in a box. I can't stand doing it. And I hate being a napkin in a windstorm. I'm a proactive type person. I don't want to fall into anything. I want to pick where I want to go and then deal with the consequences if I don't get there, right? So I was bothered a little bit this offseason that they weren't going to spend any time on free agency, even though they've proven to do a real good job with that. And they weren't going to spend any money on a starter or anybody like that. They were using it for depth. I like the fact that you're supplementing your team with free agency, but I don't think that means getting a whole bunch of, and I hate to say this way, but getting a bunch of fringe depth pieces on your roster. I want the 53 best players you can find. The 53 best players you can find. And right now, the draft is where you find them for cheap, especially if they're very productive, right? If they're productive 9 times out of 10, that means you drafted them whether it be in the second, third, fourth, or all the way through the 7th round. That's where you hit gold when you get guys like that are productive, right? So I understand the emphasis and the focus on the draft. But you can alleviate some of those concerns by just going out and finding that one dude in free agency saying, bang, come here, go play. We want you to come in and play for us. Bang, right there. So if that guy is a slot, pay attention. If it's a slot hybrid safety corner, maybe Chauncey Gardner-Johnson didn't fit culture-wise, and that's why he wasn't an option. But there were other people that were. But they didn't do it. The Jaguars did not go and get that guy in free agency. So that's why I think they're going to take that guy at number 24 if he falls to him, and that's Brian Branch. So there's your tease. There's your look ahead. That's who we're going to talk about in segment 2. But when you now come out and say, well, we got 3 guys and one of them's going, we're pretty sure that one of them's going to fall to us. That means that one, you know who everybody else thinks is in the top 23. 2, if one of your guys does fall to you, that means you're assuming that nobody will trade and get in front of you and take him. And 3, now it doesn't mean the Jaguars, it doesn't mean they're going to move, but I'm just going by what Baalke said. Trent Baalke said, we believe that when we pick one of these guys, is going to be there. So therefore, that doesn't sound like somebody that's going to be willing to go up a couple of spots, right? The other thing is this, and then to go up a couple of spots, that means you have to give up compensation. And you don't want to do that because by you not doing anything in free agency, the only way you're going to be able to get players is in the draft. So you need more bite apple. Now, either those 2 things, or it means the third thing. The third thing is when you're so confident that he's going to be there and nobody's going to pick him, that's probably because you think nobody is rating him as the 24. So that means you're going to take the 35th best player at 24 because he's a fit for you. And I don't know if I like that either. because you're going to do that. You probably need to trade back and just try to get more bites at the apple and add more players. But that's where we are. Whether I like it or not, we are here. And we're going to see how this all works out. I'll be able to tell you further about Brian Branch, the possibilities of Brian Branch being the choice at 24. I'm going to do all of that stuff here on Locked On Jaguars. First, though, I'm going to tell you about today's sponsor, which is BetterHelp. Man, if you don't know, life will throw you a curve ball more often than you know, right? This show and episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. This show is brought to you by BetterHelp, and I think you need to pay real close attention if you've ever needed a therapist, because BetterHelp is exactly that. You can get a therapist to help you through life's problems. But sometimes, even me, the biggest, the strongest, the baddest, we have issues, and we have to get some extra help. And you have to get to know yourself. It can be a lifelong process, especially because we're always growing and changing. Therapy is all about deepening your self-awareness and understanding, because sometimes we don't know what we want or why we react the way we do until we talk things through. I mean, it's super helpful. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Discover your potential with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon, all one word. Okay, man, rolling through here on Locked On Jaguars. Draft week is upon us, and I know everyone is super excited about that, because the Jaguars finally get to add somebody that the team thinks, or that the fans think, are going to be starting. And I think that's critical, and I think that's super important, because they didn't add any potential starters in free agency, even though they got Calvin Ridley in off of his suspension, and that was a trade that happened last year during the trade deadline from Atlanta Falcons. But I have no issues with Brian Branch. And when I say the fans have spoken, I'm not saying that every single fan wants Brian Branch. That's not what I'm saying. But I've watched it. I've seen the tweets. I've looked at social media. I looked at more mock drafts than I want to admit that I've looked at. I've gone through it piece by piece by piece by piece. And the resounding favorite, probably at about a 75% clip, was Brian Branch, because I believe players feel, or people feel, that slot has to be manned. A guy that's a sure tackler. They did miss some tackles when guys caught balls last year. A guy that's a sure tackler, a guy that can guard some of these running backs and wideouts and even tight ends that seem to run across the pattern or the defense every single week and cause them problems. Someone who's sudden, who can blitz off of when he's in a tight formation, and eventually, we assume that he's a starter, because teams are starting at 4-2-5, but they're playing nickel 70% of the time. That number used to be 60%, but I think it's up to over 70%. So he's a 4-2-5 starter from day one, is what I believe people believe. And I think he's going to be a really good player. I really do. The team says that pass rush is the most important thing. Coverage can help pass rush, that they need to improve anyway. Coverage can definitely help pass rush. They work hand in hand, and pass rush can help coverage. This pick won't fix that, in my opinion. And I was afraid at one point, I was a little bit weary. By the way, it wouldn't be my pick, but this ain't about me, it's about y'all. I was a little bit weary that picking someone who, in the first round, at this point, who, if other teams formation it correctly, he might not even be on the field, especially in goal line situations or short yardage, or some things where you need, if they start running the ball, what are they going to do? Who are they going to take out of the game? If a team just starts slamming you and running the ball down your throat, the way a couple of teams actually did last year, who's gonna come out? So those things kind of bother me a little bit. The tape is great. The combine was decent and good. It was okay. It wasn't super freakish. And by no means did I get any inside information from inside the building or anywhere else for me to know exactly that this is who the Jaguars are taking or who they're targeting or who their number one target is. This is just me, and this is me blending, what I've heard to the experts that I trust to what the fans want and what the fans desire. Based on the information that we heard Trent Baalke the other day when he says one of these three we're confident that they'll be there. It's them looking at the board. It's them probably taking inventory of all the guys that they don't have on the board that'll go. I suspect that a guy like Jalen Carter probably isn't on their board, to be honest. None of the quarterbacks are, so that's 6. So the Jaguars are probably getting like their 18th guy. If you take off JSN and if you take off any other wide receiver, because I don't necessarily think that those areas are where they're looking at, then they might be even getting their 14th selection if from their board. So I do think that Brian Branch is a really, really good player. Ryan Clark raves about him, and Ryan Clark knows a little bit thing about playing high-level defensive back in the NFL. I think he's a lot like he's very similar. While he might not be as big, but he's very similar in terms of what he's able to do from a guy that Doug Peterson knows very well, and that's Malcolm Jenkins. And Malcolm Jenkins is guys like that are very, very important. Remember a few years back when Trent Baalke, I believe Trent Baalke was the GM in San Francisco, and they picked Jimmy Ward. It's kind of the same thing. You want a guy on the field that plays with more of a navigation system than he does with speed in this particular case, but he's a sure tackler, and he will mix it up. And he's not a box safety. He covers, but he's a willing tackler, and he's willing to come up and get things to hit people. Honey Badger was that way, if you think back about it. Kevin Byard sort of that way a little bit, even though he's more of a guy who can play in the middle of the field and in the box, and he's been an All-Pro like 3 or 4 times, so he's the real deal. But I do think that I can see it, and I can understand how folks think or believe that Brian Branch will make this football team better. So Malcolm Jenkins is sort of my comp for him. And if you're going to tell Doug Peterson that there's a guy here that can fill the role of your defensive captain when you won the Super Bowl, I think that makes a lot of sense for him. It makes a lot of sense for everyone else. I'll tell you about the danger of believing that he's going to be there for one, and then the danger of thinking that this is going to solve some bigger problems. I'll do that here in the third and final segment on Locked On Jaguars. All right, third and final segment here on Locked On Jaguars. Make sure you check out all week all of the coverage here. After making us your first listen, your second listen will be the one that's going to come tomorrow. And tomorrow what's going to come is we're going to take a look at another one of those 3 players that I believe the Jaguars are looking at. And then come Wednesday, we're going to take another of those 3 players that Trent Baalke says we believe one of them is going to be there. And one of these 3 picks will be the most likely guys that they're targeting and that they feel. And then on the last day, I'm going to review on Thursday, on draft day, I'm going to review all of those guys. I'm going to give you the latest rumors, news, and notes. And I'm going to say, what would Wig do? Triple WD. What would Wig do? Tell you what I think they are going to do in all of these different scenarios and situations. So make sure you look forward to that. Now, the danger in Brian Branch and thinking and hoping that your number one pick. And see, this is what I hate that the Jags, if they have 3 guys and they end up having to settle, I would want to know who the number one guy is. But if I did know that, that means that people over there aren't doing the jobs, because I'm not supposed to know that. No one's supposed to know any of this stuff because it's a need to know basis. And then actually letting people know weakens your position in terms of what you'll actually be able to do. So you don't want people to know who you're targeting. But the reason why there's a chance that a guy like Brian Branch would get picked, one, he's a really good player. Two, if there's a team that has a specific problem with tackling in the secondary, and I'm sure there are a lot of them, other teams can go, damn. If there are teams that are really, really good personnel wise, but happen to be picking ahead of the Jaguars, either because they had some bad luck down the stretch, Green Bay, or they have multiple first round picks and they have a lot of needs, Houston. Those types of teams. Okay. And I'm sure that there might be more, or there are teams that aren't as far off as you think, Detroit, that need something specific, or and this is the versatility of Branch, or in terms of a team like Houston that needs a whole bunch. Somebody just says, man, just draft a guy that makes us better that's going to play for 10 years. Just draft. We don't have to pick a dude to get touchdowns, and we might need a quarterback, but guess what? We don't like any of those guys, so we'll just wait until the right one comes. But in the meantime, we need to just draft somebody that makes us better. Well, he's the type of dude that does that, to be honest with you, right? Like at the very least, you think Brian Branch is going to be a solid pro for 10 years. At the very least, he's going to be a guy. And see, this is the difference between picking at 24 and picking at number one. On number one, you probably need to be trying to get the guy that's going to get the gold or yellow jacket and end up in Canton with a bust and not be a bust. At 24, or somewhere in the middle, somewhere right before that, because when you're talking about 24, you're talking about playoff teams, but there are 6 or 7 spaces in front of that. Well, I think the 20th team didn't make the playoffs because the other 12 did. I think my math is correct. But there's some teams at 17, 18, 19, and I've just mentioned them, that when you're that close, Baltimore, right? If they end up with a second first round pick, they already have one. If they trade Lamar Jackson to another team, he's just exactly what I'm talking about. The Jets, if they keep their pick and they've gotten wide receivers, they've gotten edge, they pick linebackers, they've done all of this stuff, all of those heavy hitter positions, all those priority positions, they've already filled it. That's a dangerous team to just go, bloop, give me him. Other teams coming up from the back that made the playoffs, right? That figured their season stopped because they just needed one stop. The Chargers are that team. The Chargers are the type of team that had a 27-0 lead, and the Jaguars scored every single time in the second half. Well, they might be kicking themselves saying, we got all of these really, really good players, Asante and Bosa and Khalil Mack. We got all of this stuff. We got all these offensive guys, these receivers, and we got a good running back or quarterback. We fixed the offensive line. You know what? We need a guy that can help us get one stop, that can play in the middle of the field, that can tackle running backs on screen plays, and that can stop some of the things that the Jaguars did to us in the second half. Draft him. He's safe. Long term for Jacksonville, I always said, why are you going to use first round pick on a dude that might not play every single play? Long term, I don't think he is the type to go out to corner eventually a year or two from now and replace Darius Williams. I do think he's more of a guy that will be a starting safety if Rayshon Jenkins doesn't stay around for 3 more years. And then it'll allow the Jaguars to draft another safety to be the depth guy, so that when they do go to a nickel, Branch still doesn't come off the field. He just slides down to the slot and another safety. So when you go to a big nickel, instead of replacing a linebacker with a corner, you replace it with another safety, because you have a starting safety who plays like a corner and he can slide down. And because he's a sure tackler, he's not your pure box safety. He's not your pure single high safety. He's just a pure football player that just knows how to play. And because of that, I think it would be a solid addition to this team. Just because I don't think it would be my choice, it does not mean that I think he will be a bad choice, because I don't. I actually think he's going to play a long time and be a really, really good player. See, it's not monolithic. We don't have to, or it's not so polarizing that we have to argue. Well, just because you know how it is on some things. What's your favorite condiment? Mayonnaise. Well, why don't you like ketchup? I didn't say I didn't like ketchup. I just said mayonnaise was my favorite condiment, even though it's not. But still, you get my point. I hope you get the point enough to join me again tomorrow here on Locked On Jaguars, because we'll be looking at player number 2 of these, of what we speculate to be the 3 players that the Jaguars are sure that one of those guys is going to fall to them. That means 2 of them probably won't, right? I doubt if you get to 24 and all 3 of these guys are still on the board, because of the way Trent Baalke phrased it. He's sure one of them will be there, at least. At least. We'll see who we think that is. Make sure you join us and make us your first listen every single day. Shout out to my everydayers and the new people. You know, new folks. If you come back tomorrow, you're an everydayer, right? All you got to do is you only get a chance to be new one time. So make sure you tap in and check out all of our draft coverage, please. Also, watch Locked On NFL, Locked On NFL Scouting, Locked On NFL Draft. A lot of stuff happening all this week, and make sure you have a chance also to check out our mock draft, which we did weeks ago. And maybe the guy that I told the Jaguars said that I thought the Jaguars should move up for, maybe, just maybe, he's one of those 3 people we'll talk about tomorrow. We'll do all of that next time. Make sure you check in. Y'all take care of each other. Get ready for the draft.